All right, during these next two videos, what I'm going to be doing is reviewing how to factor, because this is going to be popping up in our next two chapters. So just want to review with you how do you factor to help you solve a quadratic. So just to kind of give you a background to this is, all of us are familiar with the distributive property. So multiplying here where you've got 12x squared plus 15x minus 3, multiplying that all up. Hopefully you are also familiar with the FOILing process, where we multiply everything that's in the first set of parentheses by everything that's in the second set of parentheses here. And we usually say the word FOIL. So first we take x times 2x, so 2x squared. Then we look at the outside term, so x times negative 5 is negative 5x. 3 times 2x is 6x, and 3 times negative 5 is negative 15. And then we can simplify, since negative 5x and 6x is 1, we get 2x squared plus 1x minus 15. All right, so what we are doing here is we are simplifying. When you go and you start multiplying things together, that is simplifying. When we reverse this process and we put the parentheses into the problem, that is called factoring. And what is the point of factoring? Factoring, think about two factors, okay? So if I were to just take the number 12 right now, factors of 12 are 1 and 12. They are 2 and 6. They are 3 and 4. It's numbers that can be multiplied together to get 12. Now, if I were to ask you, what are factors of 0? Well, you have an endless supply, because you could take 0 times 1, you could take 0 times 2, 0 times 3, 0 times 4, and 0 times 5. Okay? In order to get 0, when you're multiplying, one of the terms has to be 0, or both could also be 0. So the reason why factoring becomes important is because we're going to end up getting to some point where we're going to take two numbers, multiply them together, and we need to get 0. Well, the only way you can get 0 is if one of those two factors is 0. So if I had x times y equals 0, either x would have to equal 0 or y would have to equal 0. Now they both could equal 0, but one of them has to. So by factoring something out, and I'm going back here, what it does here is it takes a polynomial, as we have here, and this is a specific one, a quadratic polynomial, and it puts it into two factors. Now these two are being multiplied together. And so if I had a problem that I am trying to solve, which says that 2x squared plus x minus 15 equals 0, by factoring this out, which we'll talk about, I know that that quadratic right there can be expressed as x plus 3 times 2x minus 5. Now, because it has to equal 0, and I'm multiplying these two, either x plus 3 is going to equal 0, or 2x minus 5 is going to equal 0. And now it's a matter of solving. So x can equal negative 3. Here I can add 5, so 2x equals 5. Divide by 2, x equals 5 halves. And so those two solutions, if I plug them back into our problem, we would end up getting to be 0. So that's how factoring is going to help us out. So what I want to do now is to show you how do you factor. All right, so as we go through and show you how to factor here, what I want to start out by doing is showing you a method called grouping. And I'm going to use this to help with some of your factoring, and then eventually, hopefully you can kind of get more into like the guessing, checking type factoring. But grouping. What we're going to do here is I see that there are 4 terms that are here. So I'm going to group them into 2 terms. And I'm just going to take the first 2 and I'm going to take the second 2. Now between the 2 of them here, I'm going to look for a greatest common factor. What is some, either a variable or a number that goes into both of those? And so right here, I could take out an x, and I'd be left with x minus 2. When I look at 7x minus 14, I could take out a 7, and I'm left with x minus 2. Now notice that these 2 factors are the exact same, and that's what we need to have happen with grouping. We're going to take the GCFs that we have out in front here. We're going to create a factor with those, so x plus 7, and then I'm going to take that x minus 2, and that is the other factor. And there we successfully factored out x squared minus 2x plus 7x minus 14. Okay? What you are doing right here is you are undoing that FOIL process. Okay? So you're taking FOIL, you're taking x times x minus 2. And that's exactly what we have here, x squared minus 2x. And then you're taking 7 times x and 7 times negative 2. And that's what I have up on the top here, 7x minus 14. By taking out those values right here, it's just showing you how you are doing that FOIL process. All right, so let's take a look at this one. I'm going to group together the first 2 and the last 2, and now I'm going to factor out the GCF. So 6x squared and 2x, we can take out a 2x, and we're left behind with 3x plus 1. And then on the other side here, we can factor out a 5, and we are also left with 3x plus 1. And so now I take the GCFs right there, create a factor of those, so 2x plus 5. And then I take the 3x plus 1, and I make a factor of those. And so here we have our 2 factors. All right, so now the reason why I'm showing you this is because we are now going to factor out, just looking for a good example here. All right, let's factor out x squared plus 5x minus 24. What I want you to think about right here is there's a 1 out in front of this 1x squared, and you're going to take that 1 and this negative 24, you're going to multiply those together. So 1 times the negative 24 is equal to negative 24. Now, we can't do grouping with this because there are 3 terms, but what we're going to do is we are going to end up making it so that it is a grouping problem. So, because it's a pretty easy way to solve it then. So here I multiplied the leading coefficient and the constant term, multiply those together, I got negative 24. So what you're going to have to do here is you're going to have to come up with 2 numbers that when you multiply them together, you get negative 24. There's also a kick to it. Those same 2 numbers need to add together to give you positive 5. So now when you're starting there and you're thinking about this, well, if we do positive 8 and a negative 3, those multiply together to be negative 24. And positive 8 plus a negative 3 add together to be 5. So what we're going to do right here is you're going to take this 5x and we're going to rewrite it. So now I have 1x squared. I don't usually like putting the 1s there. So x squared. And we're going to rewrite the 5x into plus 8x. And I'm going to use a different color, sorry. So we're going to go plus 8x minus 3x minus 24. So now what I'm doing here is I'm just rewriting that 5x, and I can't just choose any values that are going to add up to be 5x. It does need to be 2 numbers that are also going to multiply together to be negative 24. Now what's nice about this is now I have the 4 terms that we can group. So I can take out the x and I'm left with x plus 8. Here I can take out a 3, but I'm actually going to want to take out a negative 3 because I need to have the factors be the same, and I don't want the minus sign there. So by taking out the negative 3, I'm left with x plus 8. Now to look at my GCFs here. X minus 3, that's one factor, and x plus 8 is another factor. And so right there, those are my two factors. All right, let's take a look at another example. We're going to take x squared minus 3x minus 28, and this one I'm going to set up as an equation. So what we're going to do here is we're going to actually solve this out. So I'm going to take the 1 that I have as well as the negative 28. I'm going to multiply those together. So 1 times negative 28 gives us negative 28. So now two numbers that are going to multiply to get negative 28, and those same two numbers have to add together to give you negative 3x. Negative 3. So now when I come up with my values for this, I could do 7 and negative 3. Oops, I want to switch that, sorry. I want to do negative 7 and positive 3. 1 second. Alright, sorry, quick little phone call. If I remember where I'm at, so negative 7 times 3, that gives us negative 28. That also adds together to give me positive 3. Now notice that I did have to make a change because originally I did positive 7 and negative 3. Well, that would not add together to be negative 3. So you got to be careful about that. Alright, so now I'm going to rewrite my equation here. So I've got x squared minus 7x plus 3x minus 28 equals 0. And now you can go ahead and do the grouping. So I can group the first two and the second two. I'm going to take out an x and be left with x minus 7. I'm going to take out a 3 and be left with x minus 7. So now my factors here are x plus 3 times x minus 7. And I'm going to put the equal 0 here. So now I turned it into an equation versus an expression because like what we did at the beginning of the video is I have to figure out, well, how can I get 0 by multiplying these two together? Since you're taking two factors, the only way to get 0 is if one of those equals 0. So x plus 3 can equal 0, x minus 7 can equal 0. So now x is going to equal negative 3, or x can equal positive 7. And then there's your two solutions. So from here on out, what I'm going to be doing is going through and solving it for x. All right, let's take a look at, how about, I'm going to pick a good one. Here we go. Let's do 4x squared minus 17x plus 4 equals 0. So now I'm going to take the two numbers here, I'm going to multiply them together. So 4 times 4, that's going to give us 16. So I need two numbers that are going to multiply together to give us positive 16. And then I need to have those same two numbers add together to give us negative 17. So the only ones that are going to work for us here are negative 16 and negative 1. So that will multiply, that's going to add. So now you've got your 4x squared minus 16x minus 1x plus 4 equals 0. And then now we're going to group it together. And so I take out a 4, I'm left, a 4 and an x. So take out a 4x, and we're left with x minus 4. Now over here on the right, you might think, well, I can't take anything out, but you need to have the same factors of x minus 4. So actually, we're going to factor out a negative 1, and you're going to be left with x minus 4. So now we have factors of 4x minus 1 times x minus 4, and that equals 0. So I take each factor, 4x minus 1 can equal 0, x minus 4 is going to equal 0, add 1, 4x equals 1, divide by 4, and x is equal to 1/4. Add 4 over here, x equals positive 4. So x equals 1/4, x equals 4. Those are our two solutions. All right, so hopefully you're kind of seeing and getting a hang of this with the grouping method. What I do want to show you also is that you can do this without grouping as well. And it's more like what's called a guess and check way of doing it, which you may have been taught initially. I know that that's the way that I was always taught when I was back in school, and have just since seen the grouping, which makes sense to me as well. And what you just have to do here is you have to be a little creative, and you got to know your factors pretty well. So first of all, I'm going to look at the first terms here, and I have to look at, well, what two numbers can multiply together to give us 4x squared? So I'm going to go ahead, and a lot of times I like to guess with, well, 2x and 2x, so we try that. Then I have to look at these next two spots here, and those have to multiply together to give 3. So I put a 3 and I put a positive 1. Now the whole thing behind this is guessing and checking. I've made my guess. Now I have to go through and check it. So I would do the foiling. 2x times 2x would give us 4x squared. 2x times 1 gives me 2x. 3x, or 3 times 2x gives you 6x, and 3 times 1 gives you 3. So when I look at this right here, do I end up with the same values that we had to begin with? And I look at the 2x and the 6x, and the good news about that is that I see that that adds up to 8x. So I have the correct factors right here. And since I'm trying to solve, now I take 2x plus 3 and set that equal to 0. Take 2x plus 1, set that equal to 0. Subtract 3, 2x equals negative 3. Divide by 2, x equals negative 3/2. Subtract 1, 2x equals negative 1. Divide by 2, x equals negative 1/2. And so here I have two solutions. I did not group it. I am just using the guess and check way of doing it. All right, I'm going to do one last and final example for everyone. And kind of, which one? All right, my last example here is going to be 4x squared plus 7x equals 2. Now, the reason I'm giving you this example here is because I want you to see that if you are ever going to use factoring, you cannot have it equal to 2. It's going to have to be equal to 0. So we would need to subtract 2 from both sides, which is perfectly fine here. But in order to do factoring, you have to have your equation equal to 0. So now, as I factor this out, we're going to try and see what two numbers can we multiply together to get 4x squared. So once again, I typically like to do 2x and 2x to start with. And then I'm looking for two numbers that are going to multiply together to be negative 2. Now negative 2, so it's got to be a negative 2 and a positive 1. One's going to have to be negative, one's going to have to be positive. Now if I go ahead and I FOIL this out, I get a 4x squared plus a 2x minus a 4x minus 2. Well, 2x minus 4x does not give me the 7x that I'm looking for. So that means that my guess did not work. So again, when it's called guess and check, you have to check your answer. So I'm going to go back to with the 4x, and I'm going to do 4x and 1x. And I'm still going to have to do a negative 2, so negative 2 and 1. And I'm going to look real quick, and the fact that I need a 7x right here, Well, I know that 4 times 2 is going to give me 8. So I'm going to put a positive 2 here and my negative 1 here. 4x times x gives me 4x squared. 4x times 2 gives me 8x. Negative 1 times x is negative 1x. Negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. That ends up giving us that 7x that we're looking for. So now I can take my two factors and set them equal to 0. Subtract, add 1, 4x equals 1, divide by 4, x equals 1/4, subtract 2, x equals negative 2. And so there are our two solutions. So again, this video is just reviewing how to factor. The next video is going to be, if factoring is not your thing, then you can use what's called the quadratic formula.